All right, let's dive into something that's at the very heart of pretty much every debate and every policy you can think of: the power to define the problem itself. Because how we frame an issue, well, it isn't just about picking the right words, it's about literally shaping our world. So let's pull back the curtain and see exactly how it's done. Just take a look at this. On one side, you see homelessness framed as a housing crisis, an economic problem. If that's the problem, the solution seems obvious, right? More affordable housing, different economic policies. But look at the other side. Here, it's a personal crisis, a result of individual failings. And the solution there? Totally different. Maybe job training or counseling. It's the same situation, but seen as two completely different problems. So, how on earth is that possible? Well, the answer comes down to this really powerful idea called policy problem framing. You can think of it as the hidden architecture of our arguments. It's like the blueprint that decides what gets built and, maybe more importantly, what gets left out. Now, the key word here, the one I really want you to focus on, is selective. Framing isn't about making things up or lying. It's about choosing what to put the spotlight on. It's the deliberate act of taking a whole mess of facts and values and organizing them in a way that makes a complicated situation seem simple and points directly to one specific solution. And this leads to a really crucial, mind-bending point. Policy problems aren't just out there, waiting for us to discover them like fossils. Nope. They are actively constructed. People, groups, they look at a situation, they decide it's a problem, and then they build a story around it, a frame that explains what it is and why we should all care. So you might be thinking, okay, isn't this just spin? And that's a fair question, but there's a really important difference. Framing, when it's done right, is a tool for understanding. It's a structured choice to help clarify a complex reality. Spin, on the other hand, that's all about distorting reality. It's about manipulating information for pure persuasion. They're really not the same thing at all. So, how does a frame actually do its job? How does it go from being just an idea in someone's head to creating actual, concrete action in the real world? Let's get into the mechanics. A really successful frame does four things almost automatically. First, it tells you who or what is to blame. It assigns responsibility. Then it sets the scale. Is this a minor issue we can deal with later, or is it a five-alarm fire we need to put out right now? Based on that, it makes one particular solution seem totally natural, just logical. And here's the kicker. By doing all of that, it pushes every other possible solution right off the table. They start to look irrelevant or even ridiculous. And, this whole process, it doesn't just happen by accident. There are strategic players involved. Researchers call them problem brokers. These are the people or groups who work really hard to make sure their preferred frame becomes the dominant one. They use everything they've got, knowledge, values, emotional appeals, to convince all of us to see the problem their way. Okay, that's enough theory for now. It's way more interesting to see how this stuff actually plays out in the real world, with debates you've probably heard a million times. Let's start with tobacco. If you frame smoking as a public health crisis, the value you're protecting is our collective safety. And the solution that flows from that? Regulation, smoking bans, things like that. But what if you frame it as a matter of personal choice? Well, now the most important value is individual freedom, and suddenly regulation seems wrong. The solution becomes education, letting people make their own choices. See that? The frame dictates the outcome. We see the exact same dynamic with climate change. If it's a scientific crisis, the core value is planetary survival. That frame practically screams for urgent, sweeping government action. But if you frame it as an economic challenge, the main value shifts to protecting business and growth, and the solutions look totally different: slower, market-based approaches. The entire sense of urgency just evaporates depending on the frame. And check this one out. It shows just how flexible framing can be. Economic development. What does that even mean? Well, if you frame it as being all about job creation, the logical solution is tax incentives for businesses. But if you frame it through a social justice lens, the goal is equity, and the solution looks more like welfare programs. Or you could use an environmental concern frame, where sustainability is key, and that leads you straight to green regulations. Three valid frames, three completely different paths. Okay, now that you've got the hang of how this works, I'm going to put you in the driver's seat. Let's do a little thought experiment and apply this to a huge issue we're all talking about right now. So think about it for a second. What is the problem with rising student debt? I mean, what's the real core issue? Is it about the economy? Is it about what's fair? Or is it just about the choices people make? Well, here's one way to look at it: the economic frame. This frame argues that student debt isn't just some personal trouble for borrowers, it's a drag on the entire national economy. It stops young people from buying homes, starting businesses. Basically, it's hurting all of us.
Or we could go in a totally different direction with a social equity frame. From this perspective, the problem isn't really about money at all. It's about justice. It's about a system that's fundamentally unfair, one that holds back marginalized groups and makes it harder for them to get ahead.
And then there's a third common way to see it: the personal responsibility frame. In this view, the problem starts and ends with individual decision-making. So the solution isn't some big government program. It's things like better financial education and, personal accountability. This table really lays it all out. Just look at how each frame points the finger of responsibility in a different direction. Is it the government's fault, systemic inequality, or the individual student? And because the who's responsible is different in each case, the solutions are worlds apart. We're talking loan forgiveness versus financial counseling, completely different universes. So as you look at these three different ways of framing the same issue, which one resonates most with you? Which one feels like it's telling the truest story? There isn't a single right answer, of course, but your choice says a lot about the power of the frame that you find most compelling. And that brings us to the single most important question I want you to take away from this. From now on, whenever you hear a problem being defined, always ask yourself, what is this frame making me see? But more importantly, what is it making me ignore? What conversation are we not having because of the way this has been presented? Answering that question, that's the first step to really seeing the whole picture.